In this disturbing image, two white girls confine a black boy in a cage in the Belgian Congo in the year 1955. The photograph is a shocking portrait of the legacy of colonialism, imperialism, and slavery, which perpetuated narratives of white supremacy. Even after the legal end of slavery, the marks of its brutality remained evident, reflecting the dehumanization and inequality deeply rooted in society. This image brings to light the desolation of slavery in its most harrowing form. Aboard one of the infamous exploration ships, dozens of black children, torn from their families and homelands, await a fate of suffering and exploitation. Their journey, endured in inhumane conditions, underscores the relentless greed of the era, a past that cannot be forgotten or erased. In this second image, a group of black men crowded aboard a ship face the unknown, their expressions marked by exhaustion and resignation. Many were permanently separated from their families, forced to endure grueling voyages as captives of colonizers. In this image, one of the most impactful in the history of slavery, an elderly and weary black woman carries a grown white man on her back. This brutal depiction encapsulates centuries of inhumane exploitation, where black women, in addition to enduring exhausting labor, were humiliated and reduced to mere instruments of service. A bitter reminder of the inhumanity that shaped generations. In this image, an African-American mother and her daughter hold the United States flag, symbolizing a freedom that was still not fully realized for many. In the early 1900s, while July 4th celebrated independence, African Americans faced the harsh realities of segregation, the unhealed scars of slavery. This image carries the strength and hope of those who resisted amidst a dream of freedom still distant. In this photo, an enslaved black woman plays with her master's child, reflecting the role imposed on black women in slavery during the late 19th century in Brazil. In addition to domestic tasks, they cared for white children, often forming bonds with them. However, these same children grew up in a society that viewed these women as property, perpetuating inequalities that echoed for generations. This historical photograph depicts a Confederate officer posing with his enslaved servant. During the American Civil War, many African Americans were forced to serve Confederate armies as cooks, servants, and laborers, without ever enjoying the liberties or rights that were central to the conflict. In this photograph, the horrifying practice of blackbirding is revealed, the abduction and enslavement of black people from the South Pacific Islands. Forced through threats and deception, these individuals were taken to endure brutal labor conditions on cotton and sugar plantations in Queensland, Fiji, and Samoa, enduring inhumane treatment aboard these exploitative ships. This image reveals the terrifying use of the pillory in prisons, where individuals were publicly humiliated and subjected to physical cruelty. Raised before indifferent onlookers, the condemned endured not only physical pain, but also the weight of dehumanization and humiliation. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888, ending centuries of brutal exploitation. In this 1860 image, a lady is carried in a litter by two enslaved men, highlighting the use of slave labor by the Brazilian elite. The scene underscores the nation's deep reliance on this inhumane system, which marked its history for centuries. In this photo, a Congolese worker carries a Belgian colonizer in an improvised hammock, a scene that epitomizes the exploitation of colonial Congo under King Leopold II's regime. While colonizers enjoyed comfort, Congolese people faced inhumane conditions, forced labor, and brutal punishments. A missionary, a symbol of the Belgian civilizing mission, is transported by Congolese people in colonial Congo. Between 1885 and 1908, Belgian rule killed half of the population, reducing 20 million to 10 million inhabitants. It is ironic, to say the least, that someone preaching humility and compassion accepted such inhumanity during one of history's darkest periods in Africa. This image shows an enslaved man wearing an iron collar, a common torture tool that limited his movements and prevented escape in 1863. The device, with metal rods, also served to prevent him from passing through narrow openings such as doors and windows. At that time, such inhumane practices were used to maintain control over the enslaved, ensuring their forced submission. In this photograph, Joseph Carpenter, an abolitionist devoted to fighting slavery, poses alongside a young enslaved girl. The image symbolizes the bond between those seeking justice and those enduring servitude. Carpenter represented hope for freedom in a society marked by deep inequalities and suffering. Captured in 1864, a year before slavery was abolished in the United States, this image shows an auction house on Whitehall Street, Atlanta, Georgia. Wealthy white men purchased enslaved individuals in this cruel marketplace, embodying the systematic dehumanization of black people. The inscription on the facade, "Auction and Negro Sales," normalized this tragedy in daily life. This image portrays an African-American soldier who was mutilated during the American Civil War, symbolizing the fight for freedom and equality. Despite the sacrifices, these men faced war and systemic racism with resilience. Phrases such as, "Once the black man bears the U.S. insignia and wields a musket, no power on earth can deny his citizenship," reflected hope for a long-sought freedom. This image shows an African-American man tied to a pickaxe, a common and cruel punishment in forced labor camps. Such inhumane conditions perpetuated racial oppression even decades after the official end of slavery. It stands as a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. During the era of slavery, enslaved black women were forced to care for their masters' babies, becoming caregivers, wet nurses, and often the first educators of these children. In this image from Brazil, captured in 1860, this woman carries a white baby on her back, but while raising others' children, they were often deprived of caring for their own, highlighting the inequality of the slavery system. An African-American Union soldier proudly poses in his uniform and weapons, with the flag of the United States in the background. During the American Civil War, many former slaves enlisted to fight for abolition and equality. In this photo, African-American Union soldiers pose in a row, uniformed and armed during the American Civil War. These photos symbolized not only the fight for freedom, but also the desire for dignity and recognition. Many of these men, former slaves, risked their lives for the abolitionist cause while facing discrimination both on and off the battlefield. In this 19th century image, enslaved people are depicted in chains on the island of Zanzibar, one of the largest centers of the slave trade in East Africa. The chains symbolize the brutal attempt at submission, as thousands of people were sold and sent to different parts of the world, marking one of the cruelest chapters in human history. The iron mask and metal collar, seen in this illustration, were brutal tools of torture used to subjugate enslaved individuals. The mask prevented them from eating or speaking without permission, while the collar restricted movement and caused constant pain. In this brutal image, an enslaved man is tied up to receive public lashings, a common practice in slave societies. Overseers were authorized to administer severe punishments, which could reach up to 500 lashes, often resulting in permanent injuries or even death. It was an extreme form of violence used to maintain control over the enslaved, symbolizing the unchecked cruelty of the slavery system. In this devastating image, taken between 1890 and 1910, a white missionary poses alongside a mutilated Congolese boy, a victim of the atrocities of the Congo Free State. The boy had his hand severed as punishment for failing to meet rubber quotas on plantations, a system of forced labor that devastated millions of lives under King Leopold II's regime. In this image, explorer Sir Henry Morton Stanley poses beside a young Congolese boy armed with a spear and shield in the year 1880. Many of these colonial explorers relied on enslaved individuals even for their personal protection. In this image, the boy is seen holding a shield and spear, prepared to defend his colonizer while being exposed to danger. Stanley, holding a firearm, ensured control in case of rebellion attempts, a reflection of colonial oppression. The iron fork was an inhumane instrument of slavery often used in pairs, connecting two enslaved people by the neck. Made of wood or iron, it restricted movement, prevented escapes, and caused extreme discomfort. Used to humiliate and dehumanize, it was a cruel tool of control and brutality. In this photograph, Herero and Nama prisoners, visibly malnourished and chained, are portrayed under the vigilant gaze of a German soldier in the background. These victims of colonial genocide in Southwest Africa were subjected to forced labor, extreme hunger, diseases, and brutal torture in concentration camps. In this photo, an enslaved laundress in South Carolina, captured in 1862, immerses herself in the arduous work of washing clothes in wooden barrels. These women endured grueling hours, cleaning garments for their masters and entire families, including every child, aunt, uncle, and grandparent in the household. With baskets balanced on their heads, these Gula women carry on an ancestral practice inherited from their West African roots. Originating from Sierra Leone, they were enslaved for their expertise in rice cultivation and brought to work on plantations in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. The relative autonomy in marshy areas allowed their language, culture, and crafts, like sweetgrass basket weaving, to survive nearly intact for over a century. A brave young girl fleeing slavery in Kentucky poses with two Union soldiers who risked their lives to help her reach freedom. With their help, she arrived at an underground railroad station in the abolitionist Levi Coffin's home in Ohio, and in 1862 was sent to Wisconsin. This image shows a contraband camp which housed enslaved people who had escaped to Union-controlled territories during the American Civil War in 1861. In these places, they found paid work and the opportunity to choose their occupations, a newfound freedom for many. In this image, armed black soldiers were part of 70% of the security forces under apartheid in South Africa, upholding a regime that denied them basic rights and treated them as inferior. Established in 1948, apartheid used the black population itself to reinforce oppression, a cruel symbol of exploitation and the contradictions of a deeply inhumane system. In this image, a Union soldier poses next to an enslaved child, then referred to as contraband by the Union Army, a term used to describe freed slaves during the Civil War around 1863. Even freed, these children continued to endure exploitation and inhumane treatment, revealing the deep scars of slavery that persisted in society. An African-American Union soldier, accompanied by his family, poses for this photo during the American Civil War between 1863 and 1865. Wearing his military uniform, he represents the thousands of men who fought for freedom and equality, while their families faced challenges in a society still marked by slavery and discrimination. In this image, a school for newly freed African Americans highlights the first steps toward education after the abolition of slavery in 1865. In the southern United States, it was prohibited for African Americans to attend schools, while in the North, institutions were precarious and segregated. These schools, often located in churches, were an important milestone in the quest for equality and community reconstruction. This poster draws attention by advertising an enslaved person not for physical attributes, but for intellectual capabilities. The advertisement depicted a black man reading to 3 children, emphasizing knowledge as a valuable asset that qualified him for purchase. The phrase, "learning is wealth," underscores the bitter irony of celebrating education while perpetuating slavery. In this photograph, a family of escaped enslaved individuals finds refuge behind Union lines in 1863 during the American Civil War. Their loaded wagon and weary faces reflect the exhausting journey in pursuit of freedom. Escaping was an act of immense courage, defying harsh conditions and constant fear of capture. In this image, this slave-trading house, located in Alexandria, Virginia, belonged to Franklin and Armfield, one of the largest slave traders in the United States. During the American Civil War, between 1861 and 1865, the Union Army converted the site into a prison for captured Confederates, transforming what was originally a slave pen into a symbol of the brutality of the slavery system in the United States. In this image, a mine worker is subjected to an X-ray to ensure he was not hiding diamonds from the mine where he was forced to work. Such distrust was so pervasive that shifts could only end after these inspections, reflecting the oppressive control and daily humiliation endured by these workers. In this image, a European colonizer stands beside a pygmy man. Pygmies, often treated as curiosities or deemed inferior, were exploited and subjugated, regarded merely as tools or objects of study. In this image, 2 enslaved men in the Belgian Congo stand in chains, victims of one of the darkest chapters of colonial history. Under Belgian rule, millions were forced into inhumane labor conditions, particularly in rubber extraction. The chains around their bodies are stark symbols of the brutality that fueled imperial greed, reducing African lives to disposable servitude. In this image, the Ku Klux Klan delivers a Christmas radio to Jack Riddle, a former enslaved man aged 107, and his wife Josie, aged 86. The seemingly kind gesture hid the irony of a historically racist group attempting to soften its image. While fighting for equality in the United States, such actions symbolized veiled contempt and reinforced the scars left by hate and oppression. In this photograph, a white woman poses beside a young black girl whose expression reveals the complexities of enslaved relationships. Though they shared the same space, their realities were profoundly unequal. The woman embodied authority and power, while the young girl symbolized generations subjugated by slavery. This photograph features Nanny Tyler of Frederick, pictured with her baby, and young Laura Frazier, an enslaved girl responsible for caring for the children of the family. Preserved by the Frederick County Historical Society, the image reveals young black girls forced into adult responsibilities, a poignant symbol of the inhumanity of the time. In this image, Thomas Clarkson displays chains and a whip, grim symbols of the oppression that upheld the 19th century slave trade. Recognized as one of the most prominent abolitionists of that time, Clarkson used objects like these to denounce the brutality of the slavery system. In his hands, these instruments of oppression became weapons in the fight for freedom. Nancy Campbell, whose name was later changed to Camel, lived 42 years under the oppression of slavery in Washington County. She gained her freedom only in 1859, at the age of 60. In this image, we see Monica, a banana seller and wet nurse, photographed in 1860, carrying a baby on her back. These women, often enslaved, balanced exhausting tasks between raising their own children and nurturing their master's offspring. In this photograph, a white family poses alongside an enslaved black woman, symbolizing the brutal inequality of slavery. Stories like that of Mary Prince, born in 1788 in Bermuda, reflect this reality. Mary was gifted to her white family to serve different generations, enduring forced labor, abuse, and suffering. In this image, a white family from Charleston, South Carolina, poses next to an enslaved black woman, reflecting the cruel dynamics of slavery. The sisters, Sarah and Angelina Grimke, shown as young girls in the photo, were raised in this environment, but later became abolitionists, denouncing the atrocities of the slavery system. In this image, an African-American man poses alongside his granddaughter in front of a fence in Louisiana. Even after the abolition of slavery, many remained destitute and forced to endure extreme inequality, occupying disadvantaged social positions that perpetuated systemic oppression. In this image, African-American workers labored tirelessly, hoeing rice in fields in South Carolina around 1904. Inheriting the legacy of their enslaved ancestors, many remained in precarious conditions even after abolition, enduring exploitation and inequality. Recently freed slaves in South Carolina dedicate themselves to planting yams, an attempt to rebuild their lives. Despite their freedom, many returned to working the land as wage laborers, as the lack of possessions kept them trapped in an unequal system. In this image, an enslaved man captured in Sudan looks through the bars that symbolize his captivity. Known as Zanj slaves, thousands of Africans were taken from their lands and transported to the Ottoman Empire, which exploited them between the 13th century and the early 20th century. In this photograph, two formerly enslaved individuals in New Bern, North Carolina, pose with dignity after achieving their long-awaited freedom. The man, a former logger, holds his tools as symbols of his work and survival, while his wife, with a serene expression, reflects the strength and resilience of those who endured years of oppression. A hopeful portrait marking the end of humanity's dark chapter. In this image, young African Americans convicted of minor crimes work in agricultural fields as part of a forced chain gang in the southern United States. During the Jim Crow era, prisons profited by leasing convicts for forced labor, often in plantations. This practice perpetuated racial exploitation and oppression, keeping the remnants of slavery alive in a new form even after its abolition. In this image, enslaved women work under the sun on plantations, performing arduous tasks that supported colonial economies. These women endured exhausting hours, inhumane conditions, and often physical and psychological abuse. Despite this, they resisted and kept their cultures and histories alive, symbolizing strength amidst oppression. A vast coffee plantation in São Paulo in the year 1882 was maintained by enslaved hands working tirelessly on the drying yards. Coffee, also known as black gold, was the engine of Brazil's economy, while its production depended on the suffering of thousands of people. In this image, we see the state of subjugation imposed on enslaved black individuals, chained like merchandise against their will. Reduced to objects of profit, they were forced to march under intense control. Their chains symbolized not only physical imprisonment, but also the attempt to erase their dignity. In this photograph, enslaved nursemaid Louisa Hayward poses with the white child she cared for. Under slavery, relationships between white children and their black caregivers were marked by extreme complexity. Louisa was responsible for raising the child who, upon growing up, could become her owner, reflecting the cruel power dynamics and dehumanization that permeated daily life in this oppressive system. Seated by the fireplace, Aunt Betty represents the scars left by slavery even after its abolition. Captured in 1915, she lived through a period where freedom did not equate to equality, and many descendants of enslaved people faced precarious conditions and exclusion after emancipation. In this image, two young African Americans work on a cotton plantation, dragging sacks while harvesting. After the abolition of slavery, many black children continued to face extreme exploitation in the fields, perpetuating poverty and inequality since they gained freedom but were denied the means to fully enjoy it. At Casina Point Plantation, owned by James Hopkinson on Edisto Island, South Carolina, enslaved individuals are depicted amid an exhausting work routine. This image, captured in the United States during the period of slavery, reveals the brutality of a system that exploited human lives to their limits, often offering only the bare minimum for survival. An African American family recently freed poses in front of a simple house in Savannah, Georgia. Captured between 1860 and 1880, it is a record of the new beginnings these people sought after a long life of enslavement. In this photograph, a group of enslaved individuals who escaped their owners rests outside a cabin. Known as contraband, a term originating after Union General Benjamin Butler declared enslaved individuals in Union-controlled territories as contraband property, these escapes symbolized immense courage in the pursuit of freedom despite constant danger and risk of life. In this image, we see Frederick Douglass, his wife Helen Pitts, and his stepdaughter Eva Pitts. Douglass, a former slave and icon of the abolitionist struggle, defied conventions alongside Helen, his wife, a white woman in a time of intense prejudice. Together, they symbolized resistance to racial oppression and a commitment to equality, a significant achievement considering the mindset of people at that time. In this photograph, Sojourner Truth, one of the most prominent figures in the fight against slavery and for women's rights, poses with a resolute gaze. Born enslaved in 1797, Truth gained her freedom and became a tireless activist, defying societal norms of her time with her courageous speeches and actions. In this image, enslaved individuals work in a cotton field in Georgia, United States, in the mid-1860s. These plantations were the economic foundation of the South, sustained by the forced labor of men, women, and children. In this image, enslaved workers walk back from the cotton fields in South Carolina, balancing heavy sacks on their heads in 1860. These sacks, filled with the harvest, represent the extreme oppression that sustained the Southern economy, built on forced labor and the dehumanization of millions. In this image, an enslaved family harvests cotton in fields near Savannah during the 1860s. It is estimated that between 1850 and 1860, more than 3.2 million enslaved people lived in the United States, representing approximately 14% of the total population. In this photograph, a group of enslaved individuals stands before a wooden cabin, likely from the early days of the American Civil War. Their expressions range from exhaustion to resignation, reflecting the harsh realities of slavery. Despite inhumane conditions, families fought to stay united, preserving bonds in a system designed to dehumanize them. In this image, two African American boys pose in tattered clothing, dating back to the 1860s or 1870s. They represent a generation born at the height of slavery in the United States, where childhood, a time of innocence, was often replaced with forced labor and extreme poverty. 4 generations of a formerly enslaved family pose in front of a simple cabin on the confiscated plantation of J.J. Smith in Beaufort, South Carolina, in 1862. Amid the transition period from slavery to freedom, this image captures the strength and unity of these people who, despite the scars left by slavery, sought to rebuild their lives with dignity. In this image, we see African American homesteaders in Nicodemus, Kansas, one of the few colonies founded by free blacks after slavery between the 1880s and 1890s. These families migrated in search of freedom and opportunities, facing extreme challenges to build a better life. Over many years, Nicodemus became a symbol of resilience and determination for autonomy and equality for African Americans. In this image, a woman directly descended from enslaved individuals is baptized in the waters of Sea Islands during a religious ritual. Despite the oppression of that century, the Gula people kept their beliefs alive, holding firmly to their spirituality, which became a refuge of strength and resistance. In this poster, captured in 1863 in New Orleans, we see a black enslaved woman alongside two children, one black and one white. The photograph, titled White and Black Slaves from New Orleans, highlighted the complex and cruel reality of slavery in the United States, where even children with white appearances could be enslaved due to racial laws. Henry Brooks, born into slavery in the mid-19th century, was photographed in 1941, already elderly, sitting on the steps of a simple house. His expression carries the marks of a life of resilience and resistance, even after the long-awaited freedom. In this photo, a slave-holding family poses quietly in the garden of their home in Kentucky, surrounded by trees and the presence of at least 3 enslaved individuals at their gates. This scene from the 1850s symbolized the brutal normalization of slavery as the owners lived their lives peacefully. In this cruel manner, enslaved people were housed in the holds of slave ships. Packed like cargo, unable to move, they endured months-long journeys. The stifling air, rampant diseases, and despair turned these voyages into true living nightmares, an unimaginable testament to their suffering.